Sometimes a single short sentence from an ancient text can spark centuries of debate. Well, today, we're going to break down one of the big ones.
Okay, here it is, from the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. And wow, that seems pretty direct, right? A command for women to be silent in church? Seems like case closed. But is it? Because here's the thing with any ancient text. The most important question isn't just what was said, but why it was said. So, what was Paul actually trying to deal with here? Let's dig in.
All right, so our first clue that there's way more going on here actually comes from Paul himself in the very same letter. It almost seems like he's contradicting his own rules.
This is where it gets really interesting. In chapter 14, he says women should be silent. Okay, but just a few pages earlier, in chapter 11, he's giving specific instructions for how women should pray and prophesy in church. And prophesying wasn't just quiet reflection, it meant speaking publicly, instructing everyone.
And that's the big puzzle, isn't it? It just doesn't add up. You can't tell someone how to do something and then, in the same breath, tell them they're not allowed to do it at all. This tells us we are definitely missing a key piece of the puzzle. And that piece is context.
To solve this mystery, we kind of have to step back in time and understand what was actually happening in the church Paul was writing to. And to put it mildly, things were a complete mess.
So I want you to picture the scene. This is not the quiet, organized service you might be thinking of. The church in Corinth was, well, it was wild. It was a hotbed of spiritual activity, and it was getting totally out of control.
You had people using their spiritual gifts, like speaking in tongues or prophesying, not to help anyone, but basically to show off. It created this really toxic atmosphere of one-upmanship, like a spiritual status competition. There was just no order, no self-control. In fact, it got so out of hand that the source material points out their behavior made them look like they were drunk. That's the level of chaos we're talking about here. A church service that looked more like a wild party than a worship gathering.
And it's right in the middle of this chaotic scene that a very specific problem pops up, one that seems to be the direct trigger for Paul's command for silence.
So, what was happening? Well, seeing all this chaotic, drunk-like behavior from the men, some of the women in the church started publicly scorning them. They were mocking them, making fun of their spiritual displays, right there in the middle of everything. Now this is such a crucial point. Paul wasn't silencing the prayer or prophecy he already approved of back in chapter 11. He was targeting a very specific type of speech. This disruptive, disrespectful, scornful chatter that was just making the chaos even worse.
Okay, now let's connect the dots. When you see this disruptive behavior and you think about how the community must have seen it, you start to understand why Paul had to step in, and step in so forcefully.
I mean, just think about the optics. To any outsider looking in, it looked like this new Christian faith was all about public bickering where women were openly disrespecting men. This was absolutely destroying the church's reputation and their ability to have a positive influence.
So the logic here is pretty straightforward. 1, the service is a chaotic mess. 2, some women react by publicly scorning the men, which just pours gasoline on the fire. 3, the church's public image is getting wrecked. So 4, Paul issues a very targeted command to stop that specific disruption.
See, it wasn't a blanket rule for all women, for all time, in every church. It was a practical, pastoral solution designed to fix a very specific and very damaging problem that was happening right then and there in Corinth.
So when you put it all together, what are we left with? What does this verse actually mean? Well, the conclusion is a pretty dramatic shift from how it's often read.
On the one hand, you have the common reading, a universal ban, period. But when you look at it through the lens of context, like the source material does, you see something much more specific. It's a rule against a certain kind of speech, the disruptive, scornful kind, all to bring order back to the service.
The goal was never to silence half the congregation. The goal was to stop the infighting, bring some decency and order back to their meetings, and protect their reputation in the community.
And that's really the key takeaway here. Paul was acting like a mediator. He was correcting a destructive behavior that was tearing the church apart on the inside and ruining its image on the outside. The command was about behavior, not a blanket ban on women speaking.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? If understanding the context can so dramatically change the meaning of a famous verse like this one, how many other ancient ideas or rules are we misunderstanding simply because we've pulled them out of the world they were written for?